Eftel was a middle-aged mage who spent the better part of 40 years studying lightning magic so he could defeat the demon lord alongside the other great heroes. And normally, this would be the point where he is shunned and betrayed for being the weakest member of the hero party. But for once, the people of the kingdom are actually grateful for his contribution. And when the king is thanking them for their great effort in stopping the demon invasion, he announces their rewards. As a reward for their bravery, the king tells them that he will be bestowing the greatest title anyone in the kingdom can have, the title of Emperor. Eftel is shocked to hear this, since the title of Emperor is usually something only nobles can receive, and even then, it's extremely rare. So for him to be receiving such a title truly is a great honor. After crowning the water, fire, and earth heroes as emperors, he then moves on to Eftel, and he says that while Eftel may not be the strongest mage out there, everyone recognizes that the hero party never could have won without his help, so he too will be receiving the title of Emperor. And Eftel is happier than ever before because this moment makes all the sacrifices he made for his training worth it. Several years go by, and Eftel is now a retired old man living in the countryside, and he spends most of his days training the young children whom he has taken in over the years. For today's lesson, Eftel has the kids practice their magic formations while balancing rocks on their heads as a way to teach them how to maintain their focus. A few of the kids struggle with it at first, but they all get the hang of it after a while, and once Eftel is satisfied, he tells them they can finally take a break. The kids are all exhausted, and Eftel commends them for their hard work, but next, he says he wants to see them practice the level 4 magic he taught them last week. However, just as Eftel is done saying that, Merlin speaks up and asks Eftel if he's sure he wants to keep going without taking a break for himself first. Eftel can see that she is genuinely worried about him since he's getting old, but he assures Merlin that he can still bend his knees without the sound of bubble wrap, so a little standing isn't going to tire him out. Eftel recalls the day he first found Merlin. She was the daughter of a demon woman who had gotten caught up in one of his battles. Even though Merlin was a demon, Eftel decided to take her in since there was no way she'd be able to survive on her own out here. And though Merlin is probably too young to remember any of it, Eftel is sure he must have killed dozens of her family members during the war, so he feels a little guilty when she looks at him with such sincere concern. For now, Eftel decides to carry on with the lesson and tells everyone to get ready to go over the level 4 spells again. But Merlin chimes in and asks Eftel if he could actually teach them some level 6 magic today. The other kids don't understand why Merlin would want to learn level 6 magic already when Eftel just taught them level 5 magic yesterday. And Eftel is a little confused as well since he didn't expect to be asked that. He can see that Merlin is eager to learn, but he tells her that there's no need to rush things because she will learn level 6 magic in due time, and for now, he just wants her to keep practicing what she already knows because the fundamentals are very important. Merlin is a little disappointed to hear him say that since she wanted to learn the magic as fast as possible, but she understands Eftel's point and agrees to just focus on the basics for now. Later on, we see Merlin at the entrance of a deep, dark forest, and she's clearly terrified, but she forces herself to be brave and face her fears so she can prove herself. Merlin plans to kill one of the monsters lurking deep inside the forest so she can prove that she is truly worthy to call herself the best student of the Lightning Emperor. That way, she will be able to take over teaching the other kids, and Eftel won't have to work anymore, so he would finally be able to enjoy his retirement. She knows Eftel would never ask her to do something like this, but Merlin wants to help him in whatever way she can. Merlin's heart was in the right place, but clearly, her common sense wasn't, because not even 10 minutes later, she's running for her life trying to escape the forest because she ran into a wolf monster, and all the level 4 magic she knows didn't work on it. Every spell she throws at the monster either misses or fails to do any meaningful damage, and the wolf just keeps charging after her as if nothing happened. She realizes that she won't be able to outrun the wolf, so she decides to take a gamble and attempt to cast some level 6 magic even though she has barely practiced it. Merlin begins the chant for the spell, and despite the fact that the wolf is still charging at her with deadly intent, Merlin manages to stay focused the entire time and complete the spell, firing off a massive thunderbolt at the wolf. Merlin is extremely relieved that she actually managed to complete the spell, and she is convinced that she successfully beat the wolf, but to her horror, the wolf runs right through the blast without suffering a single scratch and knocks her to the ground. It then slowly walks up to Merlin, but as it is about to eat her, the monster is suddenly struck down by a proper bolt of lightning. Merlin is overjoyed when she hears the crackle of lightning because she knows that means Eftel has come to save her. But that smile quickly fades once she sees how angry Eftel is since he had specifically warned her not to go into the forest. Merlin shrinks back with guilt and apologizes for her foolishness. Eftel begins lecturing Merlin on how she needs to stop trying to rush everything because power that isn't fully perfected before use cannot be called true power at all. He reminds her that even the most powerful magic becomes useless if the person casting it doesn't properly understand it. While Eftel is in the middle of his speech, the wolf monster suddenly gets back up and appears behind him, but Eftel doesn't even turn around to face it. He just casually tells it not to interrupt while he's in the middle of teaching his student a lesson, and then he proceeds to hit it with some level 10 magic, incinerating the wolf in an instant. A little while later, Eftel brings Merlin back home, and she still can't believe how amazing and awe-inspiring Eftel looked when he used that level 10 spell earlier. But Eftel tells her to hurry up and get to bed because she has had a long day. Merlin agrees, and she's about to go get ready for bed, but all of a sudden, Eftel falls to his knees and begins spitting up blood. Merlin rushes over to his side because she's worried about him, and Eftel apologizes for letting her see him like this since he knows she looks up to him. But Merlin reveals that she already knew about Eftel's sickness. She had noticed it a while ago, and that's why she was working so hard in hopes of becoming Eftel's successor so he won't have to put so much strain on himself. Eftel is ashamed to realize that his condition is what drove Merlin to become so reckless in the pursuit of power, but he tells her he doesn't have much time left, so he can't afford to waste a single minute resting. Merlin doesn't understand why Eftel is still so insistent on working even though he is so sick, so Eftel explains that he wants to be the one to teach the next generation of mages like Merlin and the other kids. There was once a time when Eftel wanted to become the strongest mage of all time, but he has already accepted that that's never going to happen, so he is doing his best to nurture the next generation. Merlin doesn't understand what Eftel means by that since he is clearly super strong, and Eftel is aware that he is indeed more powerful than most mages, but he stands no chance of ever reaching the top since the other emperors are all younger, stronger, and more talented than he is. The next morning, bright and early, one of Eftel's students comes knocking on his door to tell Eftel some really good news. Apparently, the Flame Emperor just published his research on a method to accurately discern a mage's magical aptitude. Eftel is shocked to hear this and snatches the paper to have a look for himself. And sure enough, the research paper does detail the perfect way to test a mage's aptitude. Eftel is impressed that the Flame Emperor was able to come up with something like this because it is a groundbreaking discovery, and Eftel really wants to try it out, so he calls for everyone to gather. A little while later, everyone meets in the lab to perform the aptitude test, and after preparing all the materials that the research said are required, Eftel decides to start by checking Merlin's aptitude. To do so, he places 4 strands of her hair in the 4 different test tubes, and after a little while, they all change color, with the blue and green test tubes shining especially brightly. According to the research, a glow this bright means Merlin possesses S-rank talent in both water and wind magic, which everyone thinks sounds about right for someone as talented as Merlin. As for the duller red and brown vials, they mean she has B and C-rank talent in earth and fire magic. While everyone else is talking about how cool this is, Eftel realizes that this test is indeed 100% accurate because it matches up perfectly with everything he has seen from Merlin's training since she was a baby. Currently, the only way for mages to discover their aptitude is to practice all forms of magic until eventually 1 or 2 forms surpass the rest. But with this method, it should be possible to appraise a mage's magical talent right from birth so they can optimize their training to become stronger than they otherwise would have been. Since this test seems to be the real deal, Eftel says he wants to try it next, and at first, Merlin doesn't see the point in doing so since they already know he is the Thunder Emperor. But Eftel wants to find out if he ever truly had what it takes to become the greatest. Over the years, he has had to work several times harder than everyone else just to keep up with them, and when the test is complete, Eftel finds out why. It's because he has absolutely no talent whatsoever. Eftel is left in utter shock because the vials remaining clear means that there isn't a single shred of magical talent in his body, and at first, Eftel completely rejects the result and assumes he must have made a mistake in the steps for the appraisal, but no matter how many times he tries it, the results remain the same. He is forced to come to terms with the fact that the reason he never reached the heights of the other emperors isn't because he simply didn't try hard enough. It was because he had been forsaken by the spirits altogether. The sense of betrayal he feels is so profound that he ends up suffering a heart attack and falls to the ground. Sometime later, Eftel has become bedridden as his condition worsens, and in his final moments, he is left cursing how unfair his life was because he kept hoping and believing that if he worked hard, he would be able to become the greatest mage of all time, but it turns out that his dream was doomed from the start. Shortly after, Eftel finally dies, but upon his death, his second reincarnation skill activates, and he is brought up to the heavenly realm to meet the goddess of reincarnation. Eftel had completely forgotten that he even had that skill in the first place, since he was first reincarnated into this world over 50 years ago, and now he kind of feels silly for crying on his deathbed a moment ago. The goddess of reincarnation welcomes Eftel back since it has been a long time since she last saw him, and she says she is very impressed with how far he managed to get in this life despite the fact that his body had no magical talent. But that aside, it's time for Eftel's second reincarnation. So the goddess asks him if he'd like her to grant him a cheat 2 times growth skill, so he won't have to suffer from a bottleneck next time. But Eftel says there's no need for that since he already has all the magical knowledge he will need to reach heights he never could in his past life. The goddess more or less expected that kind of answer from Eftel since that's the kind of guy he is, and since he is all set, she proceeds to reincarnate him into his new life. The next time Eftel opens his eyes, he finds himself in the body of a young boy who lives with his mother in the countryside. His life here is pretty normal, but now that he has recalled the memories from his past life, he immediately sneaks off to the shed, the first chance he gets to try out the aptitude appraisal method the Fire Emperor developed. He was hoping that in this life, he may finally get some good magical aptitudes so he can surpass his former self, but to his utter disappointment, he finds out that he also has 0 talent in this life as well, and he is really starting to regret turning down that cheat skill the goddess offered him now. With him being completely talentless yet again, he imagines he is going to end up bottlenecking after learning 10th level magic like he did in his last life. But just as he is in the middle of despairing over his mediocre fate, he suddenly notices a dragon flying overhead, and it looks like it's heading straight for the city. There's a group of knights trying to stop the dragon, so Eftel tries running after them to go help, but then he realizes that he's still a 4-year-old here. He probably could have taken that dragon down in an instant if he had been at his peak, but with this toddler body, there's no way he could cast his original 10th level magic. However, just as Eftel is thinking about his spell, his body suddenly begins to react, and the spell that he spent his entire last life developing is accidentally cast, striking the dragon down in one hit. The knights all gather around the fallen dragon, and they are really confused since they have no idea how the dragon was taken down, and honestly, so is Eftel since he never could have expected that he would retain the skills he gained at the peak of his past life in this new body. 3 years have passed since Eftel reincarnated into this body, and through studying, he has figured out that he is indeed still in the same world as before, but it is 400 years in the future from Eftel's past life. As for his current family, aside from his mother, he also technically has a father, but he has never seen him before. His father's name is apparently Duke Orkat, and he happens to be one of Eftel's descendants, so he was hoping he would get to meet him, but he hasn't had any such luck. His mother is one of Orkat's many mistresses, but she has no magical talent, and the other mistresses don't like her, since they think someone with no magical aptitude has no place in a mage family, so they sent her to live out in the middle of nowhere, and that essentially means that Eftel isn't recognized as a member of the family either. Fraser notices Eftel looking sad, so he apologizes for how he is being treated, and he says he would like to convince Orkat to change his mind, but so far, it hasn't been easy. Fraser treats Eftel as though he were his own little brother, but in reality, Fraser is only Eftel's half-brother since Fraser is actually the second son of Orkat's legitimate wife. He took pity on Eftel and his mother's situation and has been helping them out here and there for a while now, so Eftel has taken a liking to him and thinks Fraser is a good man. Fraser already dropped off some money to help them get by for the month, but he asks them if there's anything else they need before he leaves, and Eftel's mom thanks him for the consideration, but she says he has already done more than enough for them. This isn't exactly the ideal family situation for Eftel, but to be honest, he doesn't really care as long as he can keep studying magic. Fraser decides to stay for some tea with Eftel and his mom, and while he's there, he asks Eftel what he hopes to accomplish in the future, since he noticed that Eftel has been studying a lot lately. Eftel perks up when Fraser asks that question, so he's about to tell him that he wants to dedicate his life to studying magic, but his mom covers his mouth and tells Fraser that since Eftel has no magical aptitude like her, she was hoping Fraser would help him enroll in military school. Fraser seems delighted by the idea since he too went to military school and graduated top of his class in swordsmanship, so he thinks it will be perfect for Eftel. In fact, since he has some free time right now, he asks Eftel if he would like to go around back and practice some swordsmanship in the meantime, and before Eftel gets the chance to respond, his mom says she'd love that. A little while later, Eftel is out in the backyard with Fraser, and Fraser is running him through some basic swordsmanship drills. Eftel is going along with it for now since he can see how excited Fraser is that he's going to military school like him. And he is sure part of it is because Fraser is being considerate of Eftel's lack of magical talent, but Eftel is sure of what he wants, so he tells Fraser he wants to study magic. Fraser looks at Eftel with pity in his eyes because he thinks he's just being delusional, and he tries to explain to him that there's no shame in accepting that there are some things you just aren't good at. But Eftel insists that he wants to go to the Magic Academy no matter what, so Fraser proposes a challenge. He tells Eftel he is going to cast a spell, and if Eftel manages to replicate it, he will be allowed to attend the Magic Academy. Eftel is excited since this seems like an easy test to him, but internally, Fraser is feeling guilty about doing something so cruel to Eftel because he believes there's no way Eftel could ever cast magic. So this is his way of getting Eftel to realize that there's no way he can study magic without any magical aptitude. Fraser begins casting a wind spell, but to Eftel's confusion, he sees Fraser using a chant and doing some weird dance to cast the spell. By the time Fraser is done, he casts a wind slash that cleaves a tree right down the trunk, and he is impressed with himself because casting a spell like that takes a lot of effort. He assumed Eftel would be left in awe after seeing his performance, but Eftel doesn't seem impressed at all. He then proceeds to wave his hand and cast a wind spell of his own. Only, Eftel's spell is much stronger than Fraser's and casually clears a large section of the forest. For a second, Eftel is worried he messed up because Fraser asked him to replicate the spell he cast, and while Fraser's spell was only level 2, Eftel got carried away and made his spell level 4. Fraser is left absolutely speechless when he hears that what Eftel just used was level 4 magic because, in this day and age, level 4 spells are seen as advanced magic, and he doesn't understand how a 7-year-old like Eftel was able to learn something like that. Eftel is a little confused by what Fraser just said because he clearly remembers level 4 magic being classified as low-level magic back in his day, and he can still go all the way up to level 10, so there must be something wrong here. Hearing Eftel say he can use level 10 magic is too much for Fraser's brain to process, so he ends up passing out, and judging by his reaction, Eftel is starting to wonder what this era's magic is really like. He takes Fraser up to his room so he can rest, and while he's there, he starts reading some books to figure out where this world stands in terms of magic. It turns out that, for some unknown reason, magic has severely declined over the past 400 years, to the point that something as basic as incantationless spell casting is basically a lost art. A few moments later, Fraser wakes up, and he's still freaking out about Eftel being able to use such strong magic, but Eftel manages to gaslight him into thinking that when he cast his spells, he destroyed the tree and accidentally had a piece of wood fly into his head out of nowhere and knock him out, so everything he thought he saw must have been a hallucination. The reason Eftel went through all the trouble of convincing Fraser that he must have been hallucinating is that if the magic of this world really is of such a low level, he would cause a national incident if he were to reveal his power. So he decides to keep it hidden for now and study magic in secret while pretending to agree to go to military school. Or at least, that was the plan at first, but during training, Eftel kept getting beaten by Fraser so many times that it infuriated him, and he began genuinely wanting to improve at swordsmanship just so he could get back at Fraser. By the age of 10, Eftel had fully embraced swordsmanship, and his skills had gotten to the point that he could now dice up a log mid-air with nothing but a wooden sword. Sure, magic is cool, but using a sword is pretty fun too. And now that he thinks about it, becoming a magic swordsman is an option, so he can just train both at the same time. A little while later, Fraser shows up looking for Eftel because it's time for their usual training session, and Eftel says he will be right there. But it turns out that Fraser happened to have something special planned for today's training session. He says he brought a guest instructor along today, and as he says this, Eftel notices that it got really dark around him all of a sudden. He then turns around to find an absolute mountain of a man standing behind him, and he is startled at first because he wasn't expecting to see someone like him. But Fraser introduces him as Moria and explains to Eftel that he is going to be his special sword instructor. Moria is the retired captain of the Knights, so he is incredibly skilled with a sword, and he wants to go up against Eftel since Fraser has been bragging about him non-stop. He tells Eftel to attack him any way he wants, and he even turns his back to make it easy for him. But Eftel can tell that there isn't a single opening on Moria, so he doesn't dare to move. Moria gets bored of waiting for Eftel to make the first move, so he decides to strike first, and Eftel just barely manages to evade the strike. But Moria isn't impressed so far because any novice swordsman could have done that. Eftel knows there's no way he's going to be able to contend with someone like Moria in terms of strength with his current body, so he casts physical enhancement on himself. And Moria is actually impressed to see him do this because it's an advanced skill for someone as young as him. This is one of the reasons Fraser thought Eftel was so special, because despite the fact that, as far as Fraser knows, Eftel is incapable of using magic, he noticed that Eftel has quite a bit of mana in his body, and he can control it just as well as any mage can, which is why he is able to use physical enhancement so effortlessly. Eftel may be struggling against Moria right now, but in truth, if he wanted to, he could have taken Moria out immediately by using magic. But he's trying to keep his magic a secret, and besides, he doesn't want to win like that. He wants to win through the merit of his martial arts skills. He charges back in against Moria, but Moria counters with a heavy slash, and though Eftel manages to block it, he is still being pushed down under the weight of the slash. Moria thinks this is checkmate since, even with the physical enhancement, Eftel isn't strong enough to overpower him in a head-on confrontation, but to his surprise, mid-clash, Eftel suddenly swings his sword to the side, causing Moria to slip forward, and Eftel then proceeds to use Moria's momentum against him to judo throw him to the ground. Moria can hardly believe what just happened, but he is man enough to admit when he lost fair and square, so he congratulates Eftel on his victory and tells him he passed the test. Eftel doesn't know what he's talking about since he thought this was just a regular friendly sparring match. But Fraser explains that he actually brought Moria here to test him, because Moria is the headmaster of the military school, and since Eftel managed to beat him, he has earned himself guaranteed admission. That said, he's going to have to wait until he turns 15 to attend. Some time goes by, and Fraser is over at Eftel's house again when a big thunderstorm rolls in. He thinks it looks pretty bad out there, so he asks Eftel's mom where Eftel is, and she tells him that Eftel is still out there training, and that he probably isn't going to return since he never comes back early, even when the weather is bad like this. Meanwhile, on Eftel's end, he is out in the forest practicing his level 10 spells, and he is a little frustrated since he is a little slower in terms of casting time than he'd like to be. So he still has a lot of work ahead of him. And he loves rainy days like this because it gives him the opportunity to train his magic without drawing suspicion, since everyone will just assume it was a regular thunderbolt. However, he failed to account for the possibility that someone might come looking for him because a moment later, Fraser comes running up to him, and he is terrified because he just saw that terrifying bolt of lightning strike near Eftel. He asks him if he's okay, and Eftel says he is fine, but Fraser begins lecturing him on how important it is to make sure he doesn't get hurt because he will be enrolling in the military school next year. Hearing Fraser talk about military school reminds Eftel that he doesn't have much time left, and though he hasn't discussed this with his mom or Fraser, he has decided that he can't go to military school. He understands that with magic aptitude tests being common, it will be hard for him to get into the magic academy, but he still wants to give it a try. But he doesn't know how to explain that to Fraser and his mom, so he has decided to leave home right before he's set to join the military school. But just as he was thinking this, Fraser suddenly said he had some good news for Eftel because, after hearing of how skilled Eftel was with a sword, his father finally decided that he wants to see him. Eftel personally didn't really want to meet his father at this point since he had already been ignored for 14 years, so whatever relationship he had hoped to cultivate was already dead. But he can see how happy his mom and Fraser are about it, and he doesn't want to make them sad, so he agrees to the meeting. However, he soon comes to regret that decision because he finds out that his father is an absolute jerk. He never once stopped thinking of Eftel as a failure, and the only reason he called him here was to tell him that he will no longer be paying any child support for Eftel since he got a scholarship to the military school. And while he's here, he also asks one of his other sons to have a sparring match with Eftel, intending to have him injured just because he doesn't like him. They all head outside as the duel is set to commence, but before they get started, Fraser warns Eftel that even though this is meant to be a mock battle, he still needs to be careful because Joachim over there is actually very skilled, and he's unbearably ruthless as well, so Fraser tells Eftel that if he feels like he can't win, he should immediately surrender to avoid getting hurt. Eftel thanks Fraser for the warning and steps into the ring with Joachim, and Joachim is actually quite surprised that Eftel didn't run away, but Eftel says he has no intention of doing that. Joachim then throws a sword towards Eftel for him to use in the duel, but as Eftel catches it, he realizes that it's a lot heavier than the practiced swords he's used to. Joachim laughs and says these swords are made from a special hardwood, and they are heavy enough that a solid strike from one of these could easily break a bone or cave your skull in. He obviously said that intending to intimidate Eftel, but he isn't fazed at all, and that pisses Joachim off, so he starts insulting Eftel and his mother in very colorful language, and Eftel can handle insults directed towards him, but he refuses to tolerate such disrespect aimed at his mother, and he is truly ashamed that such scumbags as Joachim and his father came from his bloodline. The rage coming from him is so intense that even Joachim feels like something is different about him, and as the duel begins, Eftel immediately charges at Joachim, aiming straight for his head. Joachim just barely manages to dodge by dumb luck, and Eftel is surprised he actually got so close to hitting him since, with how the others were hyping Joachim up, he expected him to put up more of a fight. Eftel throws out a few more strikes to test the extent of Joachim's limits, and Joachim is really struggling out here. He just barely manages to block Eftel's final strike, but everything Eftel just did was without using his physical enhancement magic. So once he activates physical enhancement, he effortlessly pushes his sword into Joachim's face and knocks him to the ground. And while Joachim is lying there battered and bruised in disbelief, Eftel warns him that if he ever insults his mother again, he will be killed for it, and he's not joking about this in the slightest. Anyway, now that the duel is over, Eftel says there's nothing more for them to do here, so he asks his mom if she's ready to leave yet. Eftel's mother is a little shocked by everything that just happened since she is having a hard time believing that her son is really this strong, but she's still incredibly proud of him all the same. After that, things pretty much go back to normal, and Eftel is honestly surprised by how quiet everything has been since he fully expects his father to pull something in an attempt to get back at him for what happened the other day, but so far, nothing has happened. Just then, there's a loud banging on the door, so Eftel and his mom go to answer it, and they are shocked to see Moria and Fraser standing there with a baby in their arms. They ask what's going on and why they have a baby with them, so Fraser explains that it's a really long story. They had recently been making efforts to strengthen security around the capital, since, according to the intel they received, someone was planning to assassinate the prince. However, just then, one of the knights ran in to inform everyone that barbarians had made it into the city, so they were already too late. It was clear that the barbarians' goal was ultimately to kill the prince, so Moria and Fraser grabbed the prince and ran away to the safest location they could think of, which was here. The reason the prince is being targeted in the first place is because the previous king of this nation had 2 sons, and although tradition usually calls for the eldest son to inherit the throne, since the second son was much more talented at the time, the second son became the current king, and the eldest son became the crown minister. Up until recently, the second son didn't have any male heirs to succeed him as king, so for a long time, it had looked like the first son's son would become the next king. But as luck would have it, the second son eventually managed to have a son. And now the first son wants to take out the second son's son so his own son can take over as king. That's a lot of sons. Basically, the minister wants the current king's son dead, so he is planning to kill him. And Fraser has reason to believe that their father has something to do with it because he stands to benefit the most if the minister's son were to become king. There's no way they can take the prince back to the capital under these conditions, so Fraser plans to cross the border and go as far away as possible to make sure the prince stays safe. The following morning, both Moria and Fraser prepare to head for the border with the prince, but before they leave, Eftel suddenly comes out in full gear and says he wants to go along as well. Eftel's mother is shocked to hear him say this, but Moria is actually glad Eftel wants to come because they'll need all the help they can get. Eftel normally wouldn't feel the need to get personally involved in a situation like this, but he recalls how well the king of this nation treated him back in his past life. So he wants to repay that kindness by looking after his descendants for him, especially since his father is apparently contributing to the assassination plot. So he says goodbye to his mother for now, and they all start heading towards the border together. As Eftel and the others are making their way through the woods, they suddenly hear a loud crashing sound nearby, almost like thunder, and they aren't sure what it is, but they know it can't be good. So they pick up the pace in an attempt to escape before the enemy catches up to them. However, to their horror, just as they are about to make it out of the forest, Fraser spots an entire army of mages posted out there waiting for them. And the army in question is none other than Eftel's father's personal mage division. Orcott had expected Fraser and the others to try and escape the kingdom with the prince in this direction, so he set up a blockade to stop them. Fraser and Moria think they should just turn around and find another way to get past the border, but unfortunately for them, the crashing sound they heard earlier was a spell from Orcott's mage division, and they used that spell to set a large portion of the forest on fire, so there's nowhere for them to run. They also can't just stay here since, as time goes on, the fire will spread more and more until it forces them out of the forest and into Orcott's hands, so they need to figure out a plan of action fast. Fraser thinks it would be a good idea for him to head out there by himself and talk to Orcott since, as Orcott's son, there's no way he would attack him on sight, and he might even be willing to listen to reason. Moria and Eftel don't think that's a good idea, and they tell Fraser as much, but Fraser is convinced that his dad isn't a bad guy deep down, so he decides to go ahead with the negotiation. He walks out of the forest with his arms up to show that he isn't armed, and he asks to speak with Orcott. He tells him that it's not too late for him to stop all this and abandon the assassination plot so they can all go back to the capital together, and when Orcott hears Fraser say this, he decides to go down to meet him face to face. Fraser is happy because he assumes this must mean that Orcott understands what he's saying and is willing to give up on the assassination, but in reality, Orcott just wanted to get close to Fraser so he could use a lightning magic device to shock him unconscious. And while Fraser is out cold on the ground, Orcott then orders his mages to combine their magic in the special magic machine to cast a level 6 lightning spell right on top of Fraser's body, which seems like overkill when you consider the fact that level 6 magic is the strongest magic they have. Unfortunately, Eftel was too far away to save Fraser, and he can't believe Orcott would so casually kill his son in cold blood all so he could kill a baby for a stupid power struggle. He had intended to just pretend Orcott didn't exist and live his life while avoiding him before this, but now, Eftel has decided that Orcott and everyone associated with him are nothing but scummy roaches and must be exterminated before they cause any more harm. He walks out onto the battlefield to settle this once and for all, and the first thing he does is cast a level 9 ice spell to put out all the flames. Orcott and his men are in utter shock when they see Eftel do this because they have never seen level 9 magic before, let alone seen someone cast it so easily by themselves. Orcott yells at his men to attack Eftel immediately, so they all prepare their level 5 explosive arrow spells and fire at Eftel, but to their shock, he remains standing completely unharmed even though it was a direct hit. Eftel is disappointed by the shocked look on their faces because it means they have no idea about constantly active shield magic either, and if that's the case, then the magic of this era really has faltered more than he thought. Orcott can't believe Eftel really managed to survive that, but he refuses to give up, so he orders his mages to prepare another level 6 spell for Eftel, but as they do so, Eftel barely needs to raise a finger to completely nullify the spell, and since level 6 magic is the strongest spell they have, seeing him nullify it so easily completely shatters the morale of the soldiers. Eftel then dashes right into the middle of the enemy formation and begins slicing into them one after another. He hasn't really had a chance to test this out on other people before, but this is the perfect opportunity, so he coats his sword in magic energy and tries using it to cast a level 2 spell at one of the mages, and it is really effective because it ends up vaporizing the dude. After seeing Eftel kill so many mages with so little effort, the remaining mages are terrified and all try to run for their lives, but Eftel has no intention of letting any of them survive. So he raises his arm and prepares to show them what real legendary magic looks like before, casting a level 10 lightning spell. After Eftel's spell hits the ground, every single member of Orcott's army is reduced to ash, and the only ones left are Orcott and Joachim, not because they are strong or anything, but because Eftel intentionally put up a shield around them to make sure they didn't die. Of course, this doesn't mean he intends to spare their lives, and in fact, it's quite the opposite, because he just thought a quick and painless death here would be too easy for people as despicable as these two, so he plans to take them back to the capital so they can face justice for their crimes, and considering the fact that their crime is attempting to assassinate a prince, Eftel knows it won't go well for them. Just as expected, after Orcott and Joachim are handed over to the authorities, they are tortured and later publicly executed for their crimes. So Eftel won't need to worry about them causing any more trouble, and as for Fraser, he actually managed to survive the attack, and it was all thanks to a special magic necklace that had been passed down in the family for generations. Eftel recalls that that necklace used to belong to him in his past life, and he is glad it managed to save Fraser's life in the end. There had been talks of stripping Orcott of his duke title after his death due to the nature of his crimes, but since Fraser had risked his life trying to protect the prince, it was instead decided that Fraser would take over the family estate and become its new head. As for Eftel, he decided to finally spill the beans about his true magic capabilities to Fraser and Moria, since they deserve to know the truth, but he still keeps the part about him being reincarnated a secret. They are both left absolutely speechless when they see what Eftel can do, and Eftel apologizes for not telling them about it sooner, but they both say it's not a problem, since they understand why he wouldn't want to reveal this kind of power. If people found out that he could do this kind of thing, it would cause absolute chaos. They ask Eftel what he plans to do now, so he informs them that he wants to go to magic school. They are both surprised that he'd choose to go to magic school even though he is already so strong, but Eftel says he wants to grow even stronger than he already is, and the two of them are willing to support him all the way. The time has finally come for Eftel to leave home so he can go to the Magic Academy, and his mother, Moria, and Fraser are all saying their heartfelt goodbyes. But Eftel's mother is especially upset to see him go since she's going to miss him a lot. However, Eftel is officially an adult now, so he is free to go wherever he chooses and do whatever he wants, but she reminds Eftel that no matter what, he will always be welcome back home with her. And Eftel is sincerely grateful to her for raising him these past 15 years. Sometime after leaving, Eftel has covered a good amount of distance, so he is ready to take a break now, and there just so happens to be a tea house nearby, so he decides to head in. While he's having his tea, he overhears an old man nearby glazing the heck out of this flashily dressed mage because his name is Edward, and he is apparently a famous fire mage around here. The old man is excited that someone as powerful as Edward is here to teach this far out in the countryside, since this is a rare opportunity for them. But Edward is offended that the old man would dare to interrupt him in the middle of his reading time. So Edward reminds him that, as an A-rank adventurer, 1 second of his time is infinitely more valuable than that of a 50-year-old man like him who is still stuck at C rank. The old man begins begging and apologizing to Edward for being so rude as to waste his time, but he says the reason he came was to inform Edward that the villagers here had prepared a feast to celebrate his arrival. However, Edward immediately rejects the invitation because he has other plans in mind for tonight. He explains that the slave crest on the slave he bought is about to be fully set tonight, and before now, he wasn't allowed to crack because it would have messed up the seal, but once the seal is set, even the world's strongest wouldn't be able to pull him out. Ethel overhears all of this and is absolutely disgusted, but that girl is a demon, and buying demons as sex slaves isn't illegal. In fact, he feels a little guilty recalling all this, because after he destroyed the demons in the war, Merlin probably would have ended up as a slave if he hadn't taken her in on a whim. Just then, a man runs into the tent to warn everyone that a giant orc has just appeared, and just outside the tent, they all see the orc chowing down on a cart full of pumpkins. And the villagers all begin panicking when they see that thing because no adventurer in the countryside is strong enough to handle a monster like that. The villagers are all absolutely terrified, but the old man tells them they have nothing to fear because, luckily for them, they have the A-rank adventurer Edward with them today. Everyone instantly feels a sense of relief once they realize there's an A-rank adventurer here, and Edward is loving all the attention he's getting. So he tells them all that he's going to show them what real magic looks like by dealing with this lower life form. He then takes out his wand and prepares to cast his attack spell, hitting the orc with some level 4 fire magic, which he believes to be more than enough to take down a giant orc since it is only a B-rank monster. However, just when he turns around expecting a round of applause for his performance, Edward is met with a look of worry from the crowd because he hadn't actually defeated the monster like he thought he had. In fact, he didn't manage to do any damage to it at all because the orc emerges from the flames completely unharmed. Edward can't believe what he is seeing because the level 4 fire spell is the most powerful magic he has at his disposal, and he knows for a fact that it should be able to take down any giant orc, but upon closer inspection, he realizes that what he's up against isn't an ordinary giant orc, but rather a berserk orc, the most powerful of the orc species, and Edward realizes that his fire magic isn't capable of harming this thing no matter how many times he attacks, so there's no way he can win. With no chance of victory, Edward immediately starts running away, and it's hard to fault him for that, but then he does the bitch move of casting a shield around the unsuspecting villagers to trap them inside with the orc in order to buy himself time to escape while the orc is busy eating all of them. Ethel is absolutely disgusted by this behavior, and he had initially hoped that Edward would be able to handle the monster since he doesn't want to draw too much attention to himself. But given the situation, he can't afford to let this go on any longer. He immediately casts a level 6 dispel to destroy the barrier, and Edward is extremely shocked because he can't believe that a kid actually managed to shatter his barrier without even using an incantation. The people are also really impressed with Eftel's magic, and Eftel realizes that he should probably avoid showing off any more than this. So he decides to hide the fact that he can use high-level magic by casting a level 3 spell as cover, and then, while everyone is distracted, he will use a level 9 spell to take out the orc monster. However, after Eftel casts the level 3 spell, to his surprise, the orc begins burning to the ground, and he's a little confused since he didn't think a level 3 spell would be enough to do the job. Edward also can't believe this since his level 4 spell did no damage to that monster, so how could Eftel's level 3 spell kill it so easily? The old man explains that, from what he saw, even though Eftel is only around 15, his magic is a lot more refined than Edward's. So even a level 3 spell was able to hit with the power of a level 5 spell. Eftel can't believe someone who is so proud of their A-rank title like Edward never bothered to learn how to properly refine his magic. And now that Eftel thinks about it, a level 1 spell probably could have done the job here. Just then, Eftel realizes that all the people have gathered around him, and he is worried that they might have caught on to the fact that he can use extremely powerful magic, but from their perspective, it looked like Eftel just used an ordinary level 3 spell. So what they are really excited about is the orc meat that is currently on fire since they might be able to eat it, and since they don't seem to be paying attention to him, Eftel decides to use the opportunity to leave. However, before he does, he has a few things he'd like to say to Edward. First of all, he tells him he should respect his elders more because the old man knows a lot more about the proper way to use magic than Edward does, and more seriously, he tells Edward that what he did back there was attempted murder. Thanks to Eftel's intervention, no one actually died, but he makes it clear that that is still a crime, and criminals have no right to own slaves, so he orders Edward to release the demon slave immediately, and then turn himself into the authorities, and Edward has no choice but to agree since he knows Eftel far outclasses him in strength. After that, Eftel continues on his journey to the academy, but after walking for a while, he realizes that the demon girl has been following him. He asks her if there's anything she needs from him, so she nervously pops out from behind a rock and begs Eftel to become her master because, while she's grateful to him for setting her free, at this rate, she'll end up getting arrested as an escaped slave in no time. Eftel realizes that she's right since the slave crest isn't easily removed, and although she may not have a master right now, with the crest on her, anyone would be able to claim her as their slave, and if she ends up with someone even worse than Edward, she'd be in real trouble. She figured that since Eftel seems like a nice person, he'd be her best bet, and Eftel agrees that she's probably right about that, but he wonders how she even ended up as a slave in the first place. Anastasia explains that she is part of a clan that has been enslaved ever since the demons were defeated during the war, and although demons aren't outright ostracized anymore, since their clan was already enslaved, they have remained slaves for the past 100 years. She tells Eftel that he won't regret becoming her master because, although she may not look like it, she is actually a descendant of the demon royal family, and she is loosely related to the great mage Merlin. But when Eftel hears the name Merlin, he cuts Anastasia off and asks her to repeat herself. Anastasia reiterates that she is technically related to Merlin, the strongest demon and the current headmaster of the Magic Academy, and Eftel begins to shed tears of joy when he realizes that Merlin is still alive and has made a name for herself as the strongest demon and head of the Magic Academy. He can't wait to see Merlin again, and since Anastasia is one of Merlin's relatives, he can't let her suffer either. So he agrees to become her master temporarily and brings her to the next town with him. Once they arrive, Anastasia asks Eftel what he intends to do here. So Eftel explains that he plans to participate in the Academy's entrance exam, which is going to be held tomorrow. Anastasia is surprised to hear that Eftel actually intends to apply as a student since she thinks he is already way too strong for the Academy, but Eftel has his reasons for wanting to go. He says the first thing they should do is find an inn to stay at, but then he hears Anastasia's stomach grumble, so he decides to go get some food with her first. He takes Anastasia to a restaurant in town, and Anastasia is a little hesitant to go in since this place looks expensive, but Eftel tells her she doesn't have to worry because he can afford it. As they walk in, the wait staff are a little surprised to see someone come in with a slave, but they still act respectful and lead Eftel over to a table for two. However, the rest of the guests aren't as discreet because the second they see Anastasia, they make their disdain toward a slave like her abundantly clear. Anastasia is starting to feel self-conscious because she thinks she doesn't belong here, but Eftel assures her that everything is perfectly fine and goes to take a seat. He had expected Anastasia to take the seat across from him, but to his surprise, he finds her sitting on the floor instead, and when he asks her what she's doing, she explains that all slaves are supposed to kneel next to their master when he's eating, so they can attend to his needs more efficiently. However, Eftel tells her she doesn't need to do that with him, and orders her to get up and have a seat at the table. Anastasia is delighted since she has never had such a comfy seat before, but all of a sudden, the manager of the restaurant comes over and tells Eftel that this establishment is strictly for the upper class, and they have a policy against allowing slaves to use the chairs. He even begins questioning whether Eftel has enough money to afford the food there, and Eftel can see where this is going. So to shut the manager up, he takes out 3 dragon drops. The manager's eyes go wide when he sees them because each one is worth well over 500 gold coins. He immediately apologizes for questioning Eftel and orders the staff to take Eftel and his guests to the VIP room, where a massive feast is prepared for them. The next day, the Academy's entrance exam is about to begin, so Eftel is trying to figure out where he's supposed to register. But before he walks off, Anastasia stops him to say thank you for the new clothes he bought her. Eftel is glad she likes them so much, and since she's here anyway, he suggests that she should take the entrance exam with him. After all, anyone is allowed to apply, and if things go well for her, she might be able to get a good job down the line since Magic Academy graduates are highly sought after. Anastasia agrees to take the test, but she isn't confident that she'll be able to pass. However, Eftel knows for a fact that she'll be fine since he can see that she has a lot more magical potential than most people. They both register together and head to the first exam site, and as the exam finally begins, they are informed that the first test is going to be a battle royale. The only rules are that the students are to keep fighting until only 5 of them remain inside the ring. As the exam proctor, Frank admits that he really loves jobs like this since he gets paid to basically do nothing but watch a bunch of kids fight, though it does get pretty boring for him since he rarely sees any promising rookies nowadays. He looks down at the field and sees that Anastasia and Eftel have both been surrounded by the other examinees, and he recognizes this as a common occurrence since, after the exam begins, people often target the people they think look weak. However, a moment later, every single one of those students gets sent flying by Eftel after he uses a physically enhanced kick on them. The instructor is actually quite impressed that Eftel is able to use body strengthening of this degree at such a young age, but he says it's not over yet because, in a battle royale, when you prove yourself to be stronger, you will inevitably draw the attention of even more people who will team up to try to eliminate you. Sure enough, Eftel and Anastasia are surrounded again, but Eftel doesn't seem too worried about it and asks Anastasia to handle it, so she begins casting a level 3 wind spell, which blows the 16 people surrounding them out of the ring in one go. The students can't believe what just happened since there's no way a new student should be able to use level 3 magic like that, but there are no rules against using magic in this test. Anastasia is starting to wonder if she might have gone a little overboard with her spell, but Eftel tells her she did a good job and that he was right about her having good magical talent. However, he asks if she really needs to say the entire incantation every time she casts a spell, and everyone around laughs when they hear Eftel say this because it's basic knowledge that spells can't be used without a proper incantation, but Eftel tells them it's not that hard to skip the incantation if you really put some effort into it, and to demonstrate, he proceeds to multicast a level 4 wind spell right there, creating such a powerful wind current that, by the time it's all said and done, everyone except Eftel and Anastasia has been knocked out of the arena. It goes without saying that Eftel and Anastasia passed this section of the test, so from there, it's time for them to move on to the written portion. For Eftel, since he spent almost the entirety of his past life studying magic, none of these questions are particularly challenging for him to answer, but he's surprised that there are so many questions in the first place because it's going to take him forever to answer all of them. By the time the test is over, Eftel just barely manages to finish all the questions, so he is relieved, but Anastasia is shocked to learn that he actually answered all the questions since, with the written test, you're only supposed to answer questions that relate to your best field. Eftel can't believe he went through all that stress for no reason, and a little while later, once the tests have been graded, the dean of the academy is informed that one of the candidates managed to get a score of 948, which is unheard of since the test scores are usually in the low hundreds. The dean seems convinced that Eftel must have cheated somehow, but just then, France walks in and informs the dean that he recalls seeing Eftel during the practical test, and the kid was able to parallel cast 4 level 4 spells at once, so he probably earned that written score fair and square as well. The dean is shocked to learn that Eftel really managed to pull something like that off because most students here aren't able to cast level 4 spells until after they graduate, and not even the professors here are capable of such a feat. So the dean is starting to wonder if Eftel might be the second coming of the legendary Thunder Mage he shares a name with. Later on, the results of the entrance exam are posted outside, and everyone gathers to look for their name on the list. Anastasia soon finds her name, and she is excited to tell Eftel that she managed to get into the special class, but she got so excited that she ended up hugging Eftel out of nowhere, which was embarrassing since they were out in public. After calming down, Eftel goes back to looking for his name on the list, but to his utter shock, he finds out that his name isn't there at all. Anastasia can't believe this since there should be no way Eftel failed if she passed the test, and Eftel is just as confused as she is because he knows he did well, but he starts wondering if they might have performed a magical aptitude test on him at some point and figured out that he has no magical talent. Anastasia immediately decides to head to the dean's office to complain because this is seriously unfair. But just then, she notices a golden plaque to the side of the main list, and on it, Eftel's name is listed as the elite special student, so it turns out that he really did get in after all. Eftel is glad he didn't fail the exam, but he can't help but worry a little because he has no idea what elite special student is supposed to mean. After doing a little research, Anastasia finds out that the elite special student receives a ton of perks like free tuition, free room and board, free food, and a monthly stipend for expenses as well. But then Eftel reads the fine print and finds out that, in exchange for all of these perks, he'd need to participate in all sorts of events and activities on behalf of the school. It sounds good, but it would basically make him the school's mascot. And that's the exact opposite of the school life he was hoping for, since he just wants to be able to quietly research magic enough to figure out how to get past his bottleneck. However, he gets the feeling that, since he has already been chosen as the elite special student representative, he doesn't have much of a choice anymore. Just then, as he and Anastasia are walking through the halls, Eftel suddenly notices a familiar face talking with a few of the professors. And there's no mistaking it because he's sure that the woman over there is Merlin. He immediately hides because, although he's happy to see Merlin again, it would draw way too much attention to him if Merlin were to recognize him and start calling him master out of surprise. And with how much time he had spent with Merlin in his past life, he's sure she'd be able to figure out who he really is at a glance. So he decides to sneak away for now and reveal himself to Merlin later when there aren't so many other people around. Eftel then grabs Anastasia and starts walking away, but even without seeing him, Merlin can sense Eftel's familiar presence and immediately turns around to see if he is there. By then, Eftel has already turned the corner, so she laughs at herself for thinking someone who died 400 years ago would just randomly show up out of nowhere. But then she sees Eftel on the other side of the corridor, and she can tell that there are some similarities between him and the Eftel she knew, so she runs up and gets in front of him because she wants to talk. First of all, she asks Eftel if he has any relation to the legendary lightning mage, and Eftel would like to tell her the truth right now, but there are still way too many people around, so he makes up an excuse and runs off with Anastasia to avoid the question. A little while later, Eftel and Anastasia are out in the park having lunch, and when Eftel asks Anna what she thought of Merlin, he's surprised to learn that Anna didn't recognize Merlin at all. In truth, though Anna had said she was a relative of Merlin's, she was exaggerating a little, since they just have common ancestors from 10 generations back, which barely counts as being related. That explains why Anna doesn't really look like Merlin, but Eftel still wonders what Merlin is doing here, since he thought she was the headmistress of an entirely different magic academy. It turns out that Merlin is here because she was asked to come as a special guest to welcome the new students at this academy. Eftel is glad that Merlin isn't actually a teacher here, since he doesn't know how he would avoid her if that were the case. But he's thinking that he should probably tell her about the whole reincarnation situation before things get out of hand. However, just then he gets called on stage to give a speech since he's the elite special student representative, and as a result, Merlin learns Eftel's full name. So now she's even more suspicious of him than she was before. Later on, Eftel is sitting at a table during lunch, and a bunch of girls from his class are crowding around him because they all think it's cool that he's an elite special student, but all of a sudden, Merlin walks up to Eftel's table and slams a stack of papers down because she's onto him. The other girls are intimidated by Merlin and leave, so Merlin sits down across from Eftel and asks him if he's familiar with the concept of reincarnation. Eftel is surprised that Merlin was able to figure it out so quickly, but then again, he recalls that she had always been rather clever, so it's not that surprising. He tries to play it off as some sort of joke, but Merlin is dead serious because she took a look at Eftel's exam papers, and aside from his incredibly high score, she realized that every answer Eftel provided used magic theory from 400 years ago instead of modern-day magic theory. Eftel realizes he messed up because he failed to account for the difference in time period when answering his test, but Merlin suddenly apologizes for getting so heated and tells him he doesn't have to explain. She just got so worked up when the thought of her old master came up, but she now realizes that claiming Eftel as the reincarnation of her master is a bit of a stretch. That said, she is still convinced that Eftel must have some kind of special connection to her master, otherwise, he wouldn't have run away from her back then. Eftel really wants to tell Merlin that he actually is the reincarnation of her master, but there are way too many people watching right now, so instead, he comes up with a safer option and whispers into Merlin's ear, telling her that he is a long-lost descendant of the Lightning Emperor. Merlin can't believe it since she was never informed of anything like that, but Eftel says the Lightning Emperor deliberately kept it a secret and taught his illegitimate son all the secrets of magic he had learned at the time, and over the years, those secrets were passed down in his family until they reached Eftel. Merlin still finds this hard to believe, so to convince her, Eftel mentions the fact that the Lightning Emperor died in despair after finding out that he had no magical aptitude. But Merlin shuts him up because she went to great lengths to keep that a secret since if people found out, it would damage the Lightning Emperor's reputation. She tells Eftel he can't let anyone else find out about that, but the fact that he knows about it is proof enough for her to believe that he really is a hidden descendant of the Lightning Emperor. She is a little hurt by the idea that her master didn't tell her about something so important, but she accepts it and tells Eftel that she'd like to see what he's made of. So she challenges him to face her during the mock duels today since she too has been practicing everything her master taught her, and she thinks Eftel would be a worthy opponent. Eftel doesn't like the sound of that since, if he were to fight someone as famous as Merlin, it would surely draw a lot of attention to him, and attention is the last thing he wants right now. He knows he could simply reject her request, But a part of him also wants to see what his student has managed to accomplish in the last 400 years, so he agrees to face Merlin in the mock duels.